All right. Hello. Welcome. We are here today with Dr. Rick Repetti. He is a professor at CUNY Kingsborough Community College, and I've known him for quite some time. Definitely admire a lot of your work, and have built a relationship not only as you as my teacher, but also as a mentor and a friend. And I'm really happy that, actually honored that you're with us for our first podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And usually I would hand this over to you, but you do something that I like very much, which you call street philosophy. So I'm going to go by your books and go by your methods and ask you to introduce yourself by first asking, who are you? Name, ethnicity, occupation.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me here, by the way. And the pleasure is all yours. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so ethnicity, my father is Italian and my mom was half Swedish and half Dutch. They were both born here, but their parents were not. Their parents were from Europe. My mom had 9 pregnancies. 2 of them were miscarriages. We had 1 crib death and 6 survivors. And I had 4 sisters and 1 brother. One of my other sisters and my brother are passed away. But it's a large Italian Catholic family. Blue-collar father. My father was a merchant marine as a young man, and for the bulk of the rest of his working life, he was a moving man, helping people move. Blue-collar stuff. And he was also a member of the Teamsters Union. He was a union delegate, and he had a lot of dealings with people in the mafia who were infiltrating the unions back then. So that was that. As a kid, I grew up for about 10 years. We moved into the projects in Astoria, Queens, public housing projects when I was 3, and we moved out when I was 13. When we moved in, it was pretty mixed. When we moved out, there was maybe a handful of white families left, mostly black and some Latinos in the projects, and it really just got racially dangerous for us to stay there. I experienced a tremendous amount of bullying and violence and aggression and robberies and whatnot that I was the victim of as a child on numerous occasions. So I learned how to fight before I became an adult and took martial arts training, which gave me a little bit of an advantage in the ring, having some streetwise fighting skills. I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of I think I had a fight at least once a week, but I had like frightening confrontational encounters on an almost daily basis in the projects. So that's like the early years of me. I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out in my senior year of high school, even though I was a kind of effortless A student. I dropped out because entering the final semester, I realized they didn't give me enough classes to graduate, and I needed like a hygiene class or something in the gym department. And when I went over there, the dean, who didn't like me because I was a kind of troublemaker, he enjoyed telling me that I couldn't have the classes that I needed to graduate. That's karma. And, I hope I'm not going into too many details about my background, but it's the kind of person I am. Who I am is based on what I've experienced in life. And I remember him telling me, well, then you're just going to have to go to night school or summer school. And I said, well, I'm not going to either. And he literally broke out into song. And he said, well, then I'll see you in September. And I got so angry that I quit school that day. My parents couldn't talk me out of it, even though I was like an A student.
Right.
I got my GED. Tried to go to college that fall. That fall, CUNY, which was free up until then, just started charging tuition. And I didn't have the money saved, even though I was working. But I wasn't eligible for financial aid because I had a job with a certain amount of income. And so I couldn't afford to go. So I just didn't go. And 8 years later, I decided, after driving tractor trailers and doing all sorts of blue-collar jobs, that I had enough money that I could afford to pay for my tuition, and I finally went back to college. I had postponed going to college too because my father, when I was, 18 or whatever it is when I finished high school, wouldn't pay for my tuition unless I had a concrete plan. He said, I'm not going to pay for you to go and take liberal arts. If you know what you're going to do, like accounting or something, realistic, I'm not paying for you to sit around and think. So, and that influenced me because I kept postponing going until I could figure out what I wanted to do when I went to college. He had that influence on me. So finally, I thought I would go for computer science. And actually, before I even decided to go, one of the triggers was, I'll tell you this cute little story. It's a truck driving thing. I was driving fuel oil trucks at the time, and I was at the depot where you bring the empty truck to fill up. I'm standing on top of the truck. They have these manhole covers up there, and you pull this big chute over it, and you lower it into the truck, and you fill up thousands of gallons of oil into the truck. And there was a guy on the next truck who I knew from the neighborhood, which was Bensonhurst, where I lived for many, many years in Brooklyn. And he asked me, hey, did you go to the union meeting last night? And I said, no, we worked for a non-union company. So you have to have like maybe 30 trucks to be required to join the union. And my boss kept it at 29, so we wouldn't have to do that. And he said something like, yeah, all these other young guys, I was in my mid-20s, so was he. He said, all these other young guys, all they wanted was a raise. I wanted more in my annuity and my retirement and all that. And I started thinking like, wow, you're planning on doing this for the rest of your life? And then I thought, no, I can't keep that. I was making great money, but I just thought I can't. I have to go back to college. I have a brain and I need to do something with it. So that it was shortly after that I decided to go back to college. So I thought I'd go for computer science because that was something I was really interested in. Hadn't done math in like 10 years though, because I only did math in the first 2 years of high school. Didn't do it in the last 2 years, was out of school for 8 years. And so I think the highest math I did in high school was geometry. I passed the CUNY entrance exam, so I didn't have to take any remedial math. But whatever the next class was that they put me in, it was trig, I don't remember what it was. I had to keep going. I had my old high school math book. I had to keep going, looking things up that I just had forgotten, equations and stuff like that, simple formulas. And I was spending like 3 or 4 hours a night to do like what should have been 10 minutes worth of homework. And I got an A in the course, but I just realized you have to love what you do and it has to come naturally to you. And this is not coming naturally to me. And at the time, math was really required for computer science. Nowadays, you could get away with, with all this visual programming and everything. You couldn't do that back then. So I just said, okay, what am I going to do now? I fell in love with my philosophy class first semester. And I remember asking my professor, Jerome Stolnitz, very eccentric man, what could you do with this other than teach philosophy? He said, well, it's a good pre-law major, arguing, debating, analyzing, reasoning. So I thought, oh yeah, there's good money in law. It's prestigious. That's what I'll do. So I got a job. I got my foot in the door in a law firm, working on the midnight shift in the photocopy department at dirt cheap. I think my salary went down to something like $300 a week, where I was making something like more like $3,000 a week. And but I didn't care about it. It was more about the future. And so, but after going through college while working in the law firm for all those years, it took me 5 years to get my bachelor's degree. I started at Lehman College because I was living in the Bronx. I did 1 semester at Hunter. I didn't like it. And then I went to Brooklyn. I graduated from Brooklyn. But in the course of those 5 years working in law firms with lawyers, I grew to hate lawyers, found them to be morally corrupt.
You and I agree on that.
And then I just thought, oh, man, in my senior year, I was supposed to be applying to either law school or graduate school. It really took me a lot of reasoning and talking to my mentors. 2 mentors that I had, both philosophy professors. One was Eric Steinberg, who told me his brother was a successful lawyer, made a lot of money, but never had time to spend it. Mm-hmm. And my other philosophy professor said that, well, if you're going to become an academic, you should probably get a law degree first, because academia is very bloody and you want to be able to defend yourself. But he was being sarcastic. But I just decided I'm just going to go to grad school for philosophy, and that's what I did. So a couple of other things about who I am. I've been practicing yoga and meditation since I was about 15, which is a long time, multiple decades. I won't say exactly how many, but and I've been teaching it for many, many years. Ever since I started teaching philosophy in college, which was 1991 when I was still a grad student, I would teach my students meditation in the classroom. I thought it was like kind of show and tell because it is a kind of Asian philosophy practice. And so I would use that as my excuse to bring it into the classroom and give it to my students. Most of my classes I've done that in. Sometimes it happened that it just didn't work out. And since the year 2000, I've been teaching yoga on a weekly basis in a variety of places like continuing ed programs, community centers, some college courses, and wellness center, mostly a wellness center in Brooklyn. And I occasionally would do it here and there and everywhere else. Yeah, so that's the general background for me. I think this is slipping there, sorry.
You good?
Is that enough for starters of who I am? I could go on and on. I could talk for 3 hours about who I am.
Well, that's what I do love about you. That was just question one, by the way.
Yeah.
And you are definitely a storyteller. They're good stories. Well, I will now move on to your second question of street philosophy. What's one belief, principle, or motto that reflects a core part of your philosophy? You mentioned earlier that you gotta love what you do. And that's what you
That's
go
career advice.
Right. So,
Yeah.
okay. So what's one belief, principle, or motto?
Well, I do love to teach philosophy because I'm very philosophical by nature, but here's one core philosophical belief that I have. It falls into the philosophical category of epistemology.
You look here.
Pardon?
You want to look here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Epistemology is the study of knowledge. All the different areas of science are specific areas of human knowledge and human inquiry. Like physics studies the nature of reality, what claims are known about physical reality, like electromagnetism and whatnot. Chemistry is about a chemical level of reality, biology about living organisms and systems and so on. Psychology is knowledge about the human mind. Epistemology is knowledge about knowledge. It's the study of the nature of knowledge itself. Like, are there criteria that need to be satisfied for anything to count as knowledge? And are those criteria ever satisfied? And how could you know without being circular about what knowledge itself is? So that's the field of philosophy called epistemology. It's one of the three main fields. The other two main fields are metaphysics, which is the study of the nature of reality itself, what kinds of criteria might have to be satisfied for us to say something exists or is real. And then the third category is called axiology, which is the study of values and value judgments, like aesthetics, ethics, economics. These all involve value judgments. Okay, so one belief that I have, which is a philosophical belief, I said it falls into the category of epistemology. And I would say that it's pretty complicated, but I believe that our sense perceptions are where we get all of our information about reality. And then we form concepts based on our perceptions. We classify and categorize things that are like and unlike, and we give them names in language, like dog. The word dog refers to everything that is a dog, and it excludes everything that is not a dog, right? So every single concept has an inclusion and an exclusion criterion built into it. So animals have perceptions, but they might not have concepts, right? So based on early experience, our minds are looking for patterns of like and unlike, or same and different, and creating a hierarchy of conceptual categories that we use to structure experience. So dog, mammal, animal, living thing, right? Process versus thing. So so there's conceptual activity. And I also believe that there's an element of volition that we use, which is intentionality or purpose. When we're forming concepts, we are trying to capture reality in our concepts. We want to make distinctions that have real differences in the world. So, I mean, I might make a concept like you're Niaz and you're sitting in the chair. If I'm an infant, I might see you and the chair as united, as one object. And I'll have a hypothesis about that object, right? But then when you leave the chair, I realize that you're separate from the chair, right? Or a mother and its milk and so on. So there's this differentiation and integration of things that go together and don't in reality. So sense perception is the objective reality. That's the test for our concepts.
Okay.
And if you don't have the volition, the intention to track reality by using appropriate concepts, you might not form them appropriately. You might create concepts that don't have any bearing in reality. Reality is a test on the validity of your concepts. And the last part of it, this is my epistemology. It's not, I can't take full credit for this, but I've learned it from, all philosophers stand on the shoulders of previous philosophers.
Of course.
Concept formation builds on perceptual knowledge, but then reason is the tool by which we test whether or not our concepts are capturing reality. Reason. So reason is the primary means of knowledge. You can have all that information like animals do without having any knowledge. And you can form concepts without having knowledge. They may or may not apply to the world. Reason is the tool that you use to, like with scientific method, you've got 5 things going on, you move one of them and something changes. So you know that that's an independent variable, right?
Right.
So, but that's what we do when we test our concepts, even as young minds, as infants, right? We learn what concepts are working and which ones don't. So that's a long-winded answer that I believe reason is our primary epistemic tool.
The next question is actually also answered by this: is why do you believe that?
It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. Yeah. But that's not a really good philosophical answer, right? And that's what I tell my students. Okay, that's what you believe, right? Why do you believe it?
Right.
Right. So, but I've already given you a kind of answer to the second part of the question in constructing my first answer by saying that there's a sequence to how it happens. We get sense perceptions as infants. They're a kind of blurring swirl of Jackson Pollock kind of information that's just floating around. We don't know what's connected with what. And we test things as we get intelligent and notice patterns to see if our concepts, or just when you're trying to teach a child colors from a little booklet or animal names from a booklet, and they get them right, but then they get them wrong. Right, and so through the process of correction, you realize, oh no, okay, small little furry pet could be a dog, but it could also be a cat. So that cat is not a dog, right? So there's a process of correction built into concept formation being tested by reality. So the reason why I believe it is because the evidence for that model is ubiquitous in all of my experience.
Yeah,
I think it's massively confirmed by all of my experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
As a great example, it's like I can compare that to recent experience with working on my niece's homework. My generation of solving a math problem, whether multiplication or something similar, I was taught to, take the numbers, add the 0, in multiplication and go down from there. Nowadays, it's different. And then later, I was also shown a way of how Japanese do it with a particular aspect of drawing grid lines.
The grid lines.
Grid lines, and it still works. So there's different ways of getting to the answer.
Right.
And
but the answers are the same.
But the answers are the same.
And the methods can be proven to be valid.
Yes.
Right.
Which makes them objective.
Correct.
We're in an age of subjectivism. So the philosophy that I just enunciated is called objectivism.
Okay. Well, thank you for the explanation. So I guess the final question of your street philosophy is, what question would you like to ask a philosophical counselor like yourself?
What question would I want to ask?
A philosophical counselor.
A philosophical counselor?
Yeah.
Okay, well, one of the things that I struggle with a lot is I've had a lot of what people might call EHEs, exceptional human experiences, or what are more traditionally called mystical experiences, or even paranormal experiences. In fact, I think I could have mentioned this in the Who Am I, in my little bio that I gave at the beginning. The very first time I got interested in yoga or meditation was I was flipping through channels, watching TV. I was a 15-year-old boy with, with his hormones raging, and I saw two beautiful women in leotards in like seductive-looking poses, and I just stopped the TV chat. That we used to turn the channels by hand back then, not by button. It was his knobs, And
I think you just gave away the
my
decades.
age. Yeah, that's true. And yes, these two beautiful women were in these seductive poses. And I realized after a few moments it was some kind of exercise class. And there was this man who looked Asian, like he looked Chinese or something like that. But his name was Richard Hittleman. It turned out that the show was called Richard Hittleman's Yoga for Health. It was a yoga class, and I had heard about it, but I didn't know anything about it. But I used to watch Jack LaLanne had an exercise show. He was that gym that used to be called Bally's for many years.
Right.
Was previously Jack LaLanne's, and he sold it to Bally's. I don't know, something. You might have heard of him. He's one of these old timers from like I was a little kid when Jack LaLanne had a TV show with exercise. But I used to watch his exercise show and do it. So I thought, okay, this is an exercise show. So I started to do it. I'm doing all the yoga poses and breathing exercises. And at the end, they had us lying flat on our back in deep relaxation. And he was guiding us with visualizations and breathing techniques and whatnot, just to have us in a state of deep relaxation. And I had an out-of-body experience, which was mind-blowing. I mean, I literally felt my consciousness pop out of my head like a gas filling the ceiling area in my bedroom, from which I was looking down at my body. And I remember thinking that, wow, there really is like life after death. This is what it's like to be a spirit out of the body, like the genie out of the bottle or something. And then I thought, how do I get back in? I got paranoid and I was like went right back into my body. But but it blew my mind, and I went out and got my hands on every book that I could about meditation and yoga. I taught myself within a matter of months. I managed to find through a friend who said, "Oh, I know this. Our girlfriend Patty has a meditation teacher in the village." And I said, "I'm going." And she was a woman who had spent like 15 years in India or something. And I just really got so into it that the more I practiced meditation, the more I kept having like weird mystical type experiences. Now, that's what led me to philosophy. But then, trying to figure out, because I was having precognitive dreams that were so complex that, I know the philosophical explanation or the scientific explanation is normally to dismiss those things as a function of coincidence and probabilities. So you've got billions of human beings who have hundreds of dreams every night, every half hour. You're cycling through dreamless to dreaming, right? But you only remember the when you woke up in the last cycle, if you woke up from when you were dreaming. But we all have dreams all the time. And the model that the scientists use to dismiss precognition is when you think you've really seen the future and it's not just a coincidence, is to say that, well, take a deck of 52 cards, right? If you shuffle them and deal them out, they're going to be 4 aces and whatever. There's statistics and probabilities about how often those things will happen. Well, if you take billions of dreams every night, part of the function of dreams is to try to make sense of experience, but to try to predict experience. You were processing data and trying to see patterns and whatnot. So the brain is going to generate hits, just like it'll get 4 aces, And that's the explanation. It's just coincidence and probability. But if it happens to you, it's hard to accept that, particularly if you have a dream, a precognitive dream that's got like 100 details right, and somebody else that had the exact same dream the same night that you did, or something like that, and then everything comes true, right? That's like hitting the lottery like 10,000 times in a row or something like. So it's not probabilistic, really. That's my reasoning. But now, as a philosopher, there's a principle called Occam's razor. I don't know if you ever learned it, but it goes something like that. And scientists use this all the time, named after a fellow named William of Occam. If you have two hypotheses that could both equally well explain the same data, whatever that is, you should always prefer the simpler explanation. That's the popular version of Occam's razor. Always go with the simpler explanation. But by simpler, that involves a lot of complex kind of meta-level principles and thinking in science and in philosophy, like, okay, what's a simpler theory? If either of two competing theories, if one of them requires you to accept more metaphysical assumptions than the other one does, if this one has fewer metaphysical assumptions than that one, then you should go with that one. That's the simpler one. So here's an example of metaphysical assumptions. Physical things exist. Here's a more complicated metaphysical assumption. Non-physical things exist. Supernatural things exist. Ghosts and gremlins and deities exist, right? Those are more complex metaphysical assumptions. Those are greater. So if you've got a scientific, naturalistic way to explain a phenomenon, right, and a supernatural way, right, Occam's razor says always favor the natural explanation, because we don't know if anything supernatural really exists. We don't have concrete evidence for it. That's a metaphysical principle. The epistemological principle that would favor the same conclusion is just that the physical explanation is less likely to be wrong than the supernatural one, right? So related ideas are, which of the two hypotheses jibes more, is more consistent with everything else that we already know, and that would favor the naturalistic explanation over the supernaturalistic one, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a long-winded explanation to my question for the philosophical counselor. Now, because of Occam's razor, I know that the naturalistic explanation from my precognitive and other experiences is the preferable one. So as a rational being who accepts an objectivist epistemology and so on, I should favor the naturalistic explanation. But as the person who had that experience, it's hard for me to say that I don't think anything really different happened to me. Like, I really believe that something happened in my experiences that is not really credible on the basis of the natural explanation, even though logically or rationally I could see that Occam's razor favors that explanation. Mm-hmm. So, but it almost feels to me like I have to be dishonest with myself if I say to myself, okay, I don't think those things really happened. Maybe my memory is wrong, I exaggerated it, or maybe, somebody tricked me and whispered in my ear when I was sleeping, it was a gag. I mean, I could come up with all sorts of what we call error theories, which would explain why it seems legitimate, but it's some kind of confusion, error, mistake, or just a lie, right? Some people lie about their experiences, right? So that's been the philosophical challenge of my life, that I've had those deep experiences that have shaped me. They make me believe that the physical model of the cosmos is incomplete. It's not a complete explanation, and that whatever that is that happened to me is legitimate. I would love to ask a philosophical counselor to spend a year with me trying to figure out whether or not my thinking about this is appropriate, or how I might think better about it.
Well, I'm not sure how many people are watching right now, or will be watching this this first show, but we'll get it out there. If there's a philosophical counselor who wants to spend a year with you, we'll try to find one for you.
Well, I'm a member of the American Philosophical Practitioners Association, the APPA, and it's a licensing body. They're the ones who certify philosophical counselors. I'm a certified philosophical counselor. I know many of them. And at some of the workshops or trainings that we do, we will be each other's, we'll have philosophical counseling sessions with each other. And I've brought this issue. But having a couple of discussions about it has never been enough for me. So, yeah, I say a year.
So what kind of responses did you get from your
I honestly
peers?
don't remember. They are kind of more like, expressions of empathic support and understanding, or, giving me permission to maybe, trust my instincts or make room for faith in my life, that sort of thing. And that's all good, but
it's nothing constructive, or
yeah, it doesn't
nothing
really
leading
solve.
to,
Yeah, I want an
spending
intellect.
a
Yeah,
year
I
with
want
you.
an intellectual. I want an intellectually complete in-depth analysis of this kind of thing.
Gotcha. Well, you definitely answered a lot of my questions that I had lined up for you, and that's definitely a good thing. But I do want to get back to what I started this podcast with. The 4 questions that you use for street philosophy.
Okay.
That's something that you've come up with, especially given your background. I was going to ask you why street philosophy, but you gave us, you shed a little light about your background, that you did grow up in the streets a little bit, and you feel a connection to that. So could you tell us a little bit about what street philosophy is and why this is something that you utilize with everyday people?
Sure. Well, I teach in a community college, as you know, because that's where I met you. And in the philosophy program, I mean, we don't have a distinct we do have a concentration in philosophy, but philosophy is, it's an associate's or a 2-year degree at the college where I teach. And we have no prerequisites for that reason. There are some disciplines there that do have prerequisites, and they might need them more than we do, but we don't. We don't have any really advanced classes in philosophy except the one that you took, which was for honors students only. That was a specialty course that students had to actually get a scholarship to get into that course, if you recall. But other than that, all of our courses are introductory. And so I frequently have students. But even when I taught, I mean, I've taught at Brooklyn College, which is a 4-year school. I've taught at Vassar College, which is a 4-year school. LaGuardia I taught at, but that's also a 2-year school. But even in the 4-year schools, when you teach an intro-level class or lower-level class, you get students who've never taken a philosophy course before. And usually they're freshmen, and so they're new to college, and they haven't really been indoctrinated or educated in philosophy.
Right.
And I love arguing with them and challenging them and asking them questions, but I have to cover a curriculum in those classes. I have to teach them what epistemology is, what metaphysics is, what axiology is, and then there are problems in philosophy depending on what kind of philosophy class it is that I have to cover. If it's philosophy of religion, that's one thing. If it's modern philosophy, I have to cover things chronologically. If it's an ancient philosophy class, I have to go to Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and all that stuff. But in the intro section of any course that I teach in the first few weeks, I'm arguing with students who've never really done philosophy before. And I find it that's the most enjoyable to me. I love that. And I've always felt and believed that these students are naturally philosophical. And, I even encourage them. I will frequently tell my students that I believe that all of us are naturally philosophical, that human beings are philosophical by nature, that children are naturally very philosophical, which is exhibited by their frequent use of the word, what word?
Like?
No. That's good, though.
No.
The word why. No.
Why?
Like is a good one because they can make comparisons,
Yeah.
but why and no is a good one too because then you're rejecting something.
Right.
To accept or reject something is to use your rational capacities as your reason. But the question why? Children want to understand. Why is the moon following us or whatever? Why can't I have my dessert first? Why can't I play before I do my homework? Whatever. The question why is an appeal that seeks understanding. So philosophy is the quest for understanding. It is the search for wisdom, understanding, knowledge. Children have it, but when they get domesticated and socialized, they learn that it's kind of socially inappropriate to keep asking why after a certain age, for whatever reason. Some families might encourage that, but by and large, society kind of stops encouraging that when kids are around 6 or 7 or whatever. They get annoying, maybe. They just keep saying why,
Right,
whatever.
right.
Who knows? But I think that's part of human nature, and I love to see it when I have my introductory students. And whenever I've had a chance to talk to students and find out about their lives, like in my office hours or something like that, I think every student, well, at least growing up in Brooklyn, a lot of them are immigrants or they're poor, or they live in the ghetto or whatever it is. They have all kinds of challenges that they're faced. Just to be there, they've had to conquer a lot of challenges just to make it to a public community college in Brooklyn. after growing up in Brooklyn. But when I talk to them, any one of them could probably write a biography about their life, which would be interesting if they knew how to write a biography, right?
Right.
So that, like, I want to tap into that. And most philosophers, like, this goes back to Socrates. Socrates would talk to anybody on the street. He didn't have a university. One of his greatest student, Plato, opened up the first university in the Western world. That was Plato, and it was called the Academy, and that's why academic subjects are called academic, named after Plato's Academy. But Socrates called himself a gadfly and the midwife of ideas. He was a gadfly because he would zap people like a horsefly at the beach that keeps stinging you, when you're trying to relax, because he would challenge people about what their beliefs are. What do you believe, and why do you believe that? But he was a midwife. He called himself a midwife of ideas. A midwife helps a woman to give birth. Socrates always felt that everybody has some wisdom in them, and he would question them and interrogate them and cross-examine their statements to help them give birth to their ideas. So they would try to define, he would ask whatever a person's area of expertise was, like a priest, what is piety or holiness? A politician, what is justice, right? A poet would ask them about the meaning of one of their poems or something like that, so that he would try to tap into what they allegedly knew, what they were supposed to know, what they presumably tacitly knew, but might not have been able to articulate, and then they would attempt to articulate it and define justice or piety or whatever, and he would get them to realize through his questioning that they didn't really know what they thought they knew. But he did believe that they knew something, and he would get them to at least eliminate false versions of what they thought they knew, and this is the Socratic method.
Right.
That's what philosophy is. So it's human nature, in my opinion. Everybody's philosophical. You don't have to. I mean, I have friends. I grew up in a blue-collar family, in a blue-collar milieu, in a blue-collar neighborhood, and first in the projects, which was really poor, and then in Bensonhurst, which was like mostly all immigrant Italians at the time. But anybody that I ever spoke to, if I had time to get into an interesting conversation, I find people to be filled with lots of knowledge and good instincts. And, if you just keep working with them, you'll get somewhere. You'll find something interesting. Now, I'm a trained philosopher, and I'm also a trained philosophical counselor. So I find it very rewarding. And I have a belief that anybody on the street is somebody that you could stop if they have the time and you capture their interest, that you could have an interesting philosophical discussion with them. Now, I haven't really been doing that on the street yet. That's something that I want to do. But I've been doing it online and here and there and, in various different minor venues. But I plan on eventually. I mean, I did it once. The American Philosophical Association and the Public Philosophy Network jointly supported this fellow, Ian Olasev is his name. He's at the CUNY Graduate Center, and he just came out with a book. He doesn't call it street philosophy. I think he calls it Ask a Philosopher, right? And we set up a booth at Columbus Circle in Manhattan in the subway station, in the food court area, like this little walkway. We set up a booth with a big sign, Ask a Philosopher, and we put out like 3 bowls with like fortune cookie things rolled up, little philosophy questions that if they didn't have a question of their own, they could pick a question out of the question bowl, or they could pick a thought experiment out of the thought experiment bowl, and then I think the third bowl was just candy or something like that. And people came by, and they would stop, and there were 2 or 3 of us sitting there, and they would just ask you a question, or they would ask one out of the bowl or whatever, and people loved it. It was really fun. And he's been doing that a lot for the last few years, and he just came out with a book about it. Ask a Philosopher. So I'm glad I forgot about that. It's something I do want to plug because I have the book, but I haven't read it yet. But I know the guy. I've done it. I'm sure.
Right.
I might be mentioned as one of the examples in there for all I know. I don't know.
You mentioned that you have done this online several times.
Yeah.
You do provide a few very interesting services. As a philosophical counselor.
Right.
I know that you provide a Socratic dialogue service to help people figure out, their philosophical questions and themselves. Do you want to speak a little bit about some of the stuff that some of the service that you provide?
Okay.
Philosophical
Philosophical counseling itself is kind of like psychotherapy, only there were a few people globally who are responsible for creating the discipline of philosophical counseling. In Europe, there's one or two people. There's one in Israel. I forget these people's names. I know the one closest to me. The one who's mostly responsible for it in the United States is a fellow named Lou Marinoff. He's a professor of philosophy at City College in CUNY. And he leads the trainings that certify people to do philosophical counseling. So I mentioned him because he calls it therapy for the sane.
Therapy for the sane.
Yeah, but like that's a little unfair to psychology too, because I try to encourage people who have certain kinds of emotional, social, psychological problems to go for psychological counseling. I almost became a Gestalt psychotherapist when I was in graduate school. I was going.
Sorry to cut you off. For those people that do not know what Gestalt is, could you please explain?
Well, the word Gestalt comes from the German word Gestalt or Gestalt, and I'm not sure the exact way it's said in the original, but it means holistic, but not holistic like in the health food sense, holistic foods and stuff like that. It just means something more like it's a school of psychology that goes back to its founder, like Sigmund Freud is the founder of psychoanalysis as a school of psychotherapy. It's one of the talking therapies, but Fritz Perls is his name. He founded it. He was influenced significantly by Zen and other forms of Asian philosophy, but he was also a psychologist, and he kind of put it together where the focus is on the whole person. So it's not just on, like, say, by contrast with psychoanalysis, which largely presupposes that most people's neuroses and other psychopathologies occurred in childhood. So a lot of it is to try to get you to go back and think about your relationship with your mom when you were a kid and stuff like that. This is more present-centered, therefore the Zen influence. And it's like they'll take into consideration even just ordinary things like your difficulty paying your rent or whatever, your diet, whatever seems to come up in the session. Like the person, there's that thing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you took a psych class and you learned about that.
High school.
But a long time ago. But let's like that concept is that we have a shifting coalition of internal needs, and whichever one is the most pressing is the one that comes to the surface. Right? So if you're really hungry, you're not going to be trying to lie on a couch and talk about your mom when you were a kid. You need to get food, right? So whatever the different things are that will manifest when a person comes into the session, that must be the most important thing that they're dealing with, right? Gestalt adopts that. They adopt a lot of stuff. It's very eclectic, the style. But it's mostly whatever arises in the session, the Gestalt psychotherapist will try to just address that with an open mind and approach it with a kind of, what do they call, hypotheses or experiments? Well, it's mostly clinical based, so it's something that the therapist cultivates skill from seeing clients over and over again. There's a lot of training with clients. When I was in the school, I did 2 years out of the 3-year program. First year, you do a lot of work as the client, so you have to be in counseling a lot. And you do it in the workshops. We would watch each other in sessions, dealing with a skilled clinician who's put you through the process. But you cultivate these skills so that by the time you're doing it in the second year, you have to have clients, and it's under supervision. But just even after doing it for 1 year in the training, by the second year, you get a sense of this kind of brainstorming approach where you'll have an instinct or a hypothesis or a hunch, and you'll say, I'm going to try this on with the client. What about this? And you experiment with a technique or whatever, and it either works or it doesn't work, right? So it's like a very fluid, almost hippie-ish thing. I mean, I think Fritz Perls is somebody whose heyday was in the 60s and early 70s. So
Gotcha.
Whatever. So that's the training. That's what Gestalt is. It's a name for like cognitive behavioral therapy is a type of psychotherapy. It's another talking therapy. Gestalt therapy is one of the talking therapies like psychoanalysis. So that's what Gestalt is.
Gotcha. And you didn't finish?
I did 2 years out of 3, and in between the second and the third year, I got hired as a full-timer at Kingsborough Community College, which is really hard to do. Philosophy jobs, you could have 300 people applying for one position. And a lot of those people, unlike me, didn't have to work full time throughout undergrad and grad school. You know, they had trusts and stuff like that, and they had publications before they even graduated. You know,
Right.
this kind of thing. So it's very competitive. So I got a job offer and I took it. At the same time, I could have done both, but it was expensive, the Gestalt school, and the bigger factor was New York State changed its licensing requirements. Now, this was a training institute that prior to the law changing, these training institutes, their faculty were all advanced people with PhDs or MSWs in social work. That those are people who get paid from even insurance companies to see clients as psychotherapists. I don't know if you knew that, but someone with an MSW can be a psychotherapist and collect insurance for it, or otherwise it's a psychiatrist or a psychologist who has a PhD. But these training institutes, if they mostly when people would finish with a PhD or their MSW, they could start seeing clients. But if they wanted to get really good training in clinical work, working with clients, they would go to a training institute, like the Gestalt Institute,
Gotcha.
and get immersion training, so that by the time they're seeing clients, they're getting a lot of support on how to actually work with clients. So that's a training institute. Now, the training institutes were allowed to certify me at the time. They'd have to accept me. They would only accept you if you had something like a theology degree, because the theology people do counseling.
Right.
Or a degree in something like philosophy of mind, and I had a lot of work in philosophy of psychology, philosophy of mind, and all that stuff. So you have to apply. They look at you and decide whether or not they're going to let you in the program. So if they let you in and then you complete the program, they would certify you. And then you could practice legally in the state of New York. But when they changed the law, that you could no longer do that. You had to have an MSW or a PhD and in psychology.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm like, I am not going for another PhD. I was done. And and I got a full tenure track job, and I just said, all right, I kept seeing, you have to be a client when you're in the program. And I
Right.
found it so useful that I kept doing it, even though I stopped going to the program. And I've gone on and off for years. I'll go for 2 years and stop for a year or two and go back. I find it very helpful just to have that kind of opportunity to do that kind of work. So therapy for the sane, like I said, it's unfair, that phrase, to talking therapies, because that implies that those people are not sane.
Right.
But they are. Some people are not. People who are not sane usually don't go for talking therapy as their primary source of assistance. They get medication, and they do that.
Right.
They get follow-ups and checkups
Yeah,
based on
they
it.
have their blood work. They're taking meds. People who have serious psychopathologies that are chemical in nature, like manic depression and schizophrenia and things like that.
Now, I did want to ask you. You mentioned that.
Oh wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So just about the philosophical counseling thing.
Yeah.
I have clients, and I not that many, but because I'm too busy. I get many offers that I turn down, but I do a few of them just because I like to do it. And the ones that I've taken on already that I like, I keep with them. And sometimes they come and go just like I come and go. One of them is a licensed psychologist who wanted a different approach other than from another psychologist. So she looked me up. I mean, I'm listed in Psychology Today, when you go and find a therapist.
Right.
But it says philosophical counseling. I had a guy contact me from California who was in IT. I forget I don't remember what his issues were. But I worked with him for a while. I had a guy from Australia. So that's what the Zoom is great for. You get to see people all over the world and help them. And it's a lot. And I on my website, if you might have noticed, that I ask people that you could ask me a question there, and I'll be happy to do it for free, just in typed, or people really need to, they can contact me and that sort of thing.
I mean,
Right.
I really agree with that, because in most cases, sometimes you can't solve a riddle by yourself. So you need a team
Exactly.
and you need some insight. And when you find that particular breakthrough to get over that that block, it does tremendous things down the line,
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes just the shift in perspective, somebody else's take on your issue, solved.
Yeah.
And it could be a simple practical thing. That's why the Gestalt, I love the Gestalt approach. Sometimes my Gestalt therapist, who I was with for many years, would like just help me do some simple logistic thing with my scheduling or something. You know, so like she'd ask me like, how are you scheduling that? You know, I'm saying I'm too busy, and then she'd actually help me figure out how to schedule my day better, right? But that's the Gestalt attitude of like, that's part of you. That's part of your life. Like, okay, where's the problem? The problem is you don't know how to use a damn agenda, you know, or the calendar on your phone, whatever. Some simple thing could be the solution to your problem. Then you realize that was it. So much stress went down, you know?
I agree with both of you because maybe Dr. Repetti did not want to share, but I'm completely okay with this, that you were my psychotherapist on and off, and this
Philosophical counselor.
Sure. And
I can't call myself a psychotherapist. It's illegal.
okay, right. But this podcast would not have happened if it wasn't an evening of conversations with you. So it did help me get over that little hump and then start this with you. So
Well, you made the decision, but you're talking it through with me did play a role.
exactly. And
I am not taking the responsibility for this.
a little bit you are, because you did agree to be
No,
the
I
first
know.
guest.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted to go back to, you mentioned that it's difficult to get, to obtain a job in this line
my
of work,
field,
in
right.
your field. And you certainly had other options. You have been around. I do want to go back to your, the 8 years you took off between school. But you had legal, you're a very bright guy. You had other options. What made you go into philosophy? And you did mention some of, some events that led you here. But then what made you go into teaching philosophy? And, 20, 30 years later, 20 years later, in this field, are you content?
30 years later, I started teaching in 1991 when I
Okay.
was in grad school. After 1 year of grad school, Brooklyn College hired me as an adjunct
Wow.
to start teaching intro classes. So yeah, it just kind of happened. I mean, look, the decision was to go into philosophy PhD program with the knowledge that, as Professor Jerome Stolnitz, my first philosophy teacher and mentor, said, you can become a lawyer or you could teach philosophy. But really, most people nowadays think that, like, in general, you can get any kind of liberal arts degree and do almost anything, right? But based on maybe the way that my father had convinced me that you need to know what you're doing going forward, right? You never quit one job without, having another one lined up. Well, I didn't follow that advice when I was younger, but as I got older, I did follow that. All the things that he told me that I resisted when I was younger, I wound up realizing that that's really good advice, and I started listening to him. But so, like, I kind of had it in my mind once I decided to go to grad school in philosophy that I would probably teach philosophy, and I was looking forward to it. I loved taking philosophy classes. I loved majoring in it. The whole time I was doing that as an undergrad, except for like the final semester. By your graduating semester, you had to have made up your mind so you could apply to grad school. So, but in my last year, I made that decision. I spent many, many hours, like I said, deliberating law school, grad school, law school, grad school, and I finally chose grad school. But like, that was made with the thought that I will become a philosophy professor. When I was almost done with grad school, I was in the middle of my dissertation when I went through a divorce, and in the process of it, actually, it wasn't really the stress of the marriage falling apart, although I know that played a role. But what happened is I got into a car accident while I was driving a tractor trailer. I was on my way home from work and got into a car accident, and I had like 3 bulging discs in my neck and 3 herniated discs in my lower back. I couldn't turn my head from side to side for a long time. I had to turn my whole body to look from side to side. I had all kinds of therapy. It took me months to recover. But in the first, I had to quit my job. My boss, the truck driving guy, he wanted to kill me because in the winter, it was delivering fuel oil. I went back to that company, by the way. Well, when I was in the process of getting my divorce, when I left my marriage, I moved in with my father, who encouraged me to just keep giving, your wife and children all the money that you were already giving them. Don't give me anything. I don't need anything from you. I've been paying the rent here, whatever, and just stay with me until you figure out, the next step. I lived with him for a year, driving a truck, and then he died. And I was still teaching. The truck driving was not, my boss let me work enough hours or whatever, but I couldn't do both. Actually, I think I just messed up on the time. Right, I was just teaching, that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And when my father died, I realized I had to make more money because adjuncts are part-timers. They only get a couple of classes and they don't make that much money. But me and my ex, we were both adjuncts. Between the two of us, we made enough money to get by. And I was giving her all that when I was living with my father. But when he died, I suddenly had to pay his rent and all the bills. And so I was like, so I had to go back to driving a truck. My old boss, the tractor trailer guy with the fuel oil. I don't know if I mentioned that before when we were talking informally. I don't think that was in the recording. No. But yeah. Oh, when I said I was on top of the truck, remember? Right. That was how I got going to college. But this was in the year 1999. Or no, yeah, 1999, 2000-ish. 1999, when I separated from my wife, I was living with my father, and he died in the first week of January of 2001, which is easy to remember because 9/11 was 2001, and he didn't get to see that. I had to go back. I had to go back to driving a truck full time, so I could pay my way. And I had finished all my courses in grad school, took all my exams, comprehensive exams, and I was writing my dissertation. I had to stop all of that and work full time driving a truck, and that was like 6-7 days a week in the winter. And then in the summers, my same boss had this cross country thing with tractor trailers, picking up big spools of electrical conduit cable out in southern Illinois, right near St. Louis, and bringing them to Astoria, Queens, to the Con Ed plant, and then bring the empty big spools back to Illinois. And this was what I would do once or twice a week in the summer. I lost my train of thought, like why I'm going into all this. Where were we?
Well, how did you get into...
philosophy.
Yes.
Right. So that's just part of it. Like, I knew that I would be teaching philosophy, but, so that's what it is. When I got that car accident, that's what's made me stop working as a truck driver. I couldn't climb in and out of the truck and yank a hose into people's backyards anymore. I was in bad shape for months. I got depressed. I couldn't exercise. I was physically depressed. I didn't realize what it was. But one of my friends from grad school, we were study partners and good friends. Her name was Beth Hasrick. She passed away. But really sweet woman. At the time, she had gone through the Gestalt psychotherapy training program, was a practicing psychotherapist, and was even on the faculty at the New York I forget what it's called, the Gestalt Center for Psychotherapy and Training in Manhattan. And so I called her up and I said, I know you're into the Gestalt therapy thing, and I was always I like the idea if I was ever going to go for some kind of therapy, it would be Gestalt, because one of my meditation teachers, Ram Dass, famous character, had mentioned that he had a very favorable attitude about Gestalt therapy. And I remember him teaching us some little Gestalt thing where you just look at the other person, you look at each other and stare at each other, and you just sit there without talking, just so that you get over the discomfort of making eye contact with a person and thinking that you need to speak. It was a kind of weird little psychological experiment that we did. And I remember thinking that was interesting, it was powerful. And so I knew my friend Beth was a Gestalt therapy teacher, so I called her up, and she said, look, let's set up an appointment. Why don't you come in and we'll have like an informal intake interview. I told her I'm going through a divorce. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't feel good. I'm lying in bed all day, blah, blah, blah. I didn't even realize it. But after I had my first session, the therapist, my first therapist at the time, he said to me, you're suffering from depression. He said, it's probably because of the accident and the divorce, but maybe the bigger part of it is the accident. You're physically ill. You don't have energy. You're normally a type A person, and you can't move around. You can't do anything. And just realizing that made it easier for me. That was that shift immediately. Like, oh, okay, it's my body. Yeah, I need a, like, I have a busy hand. I need a glove that you can move.
Right.
I couldn't hardly move, so I was depressed physically and mentally. So that was at the time, and that's when I thought, okay, that shifted something for me, and I really thought, wow, this Gestalt stuff, really, I remember what Ram Dass had said, and I thought, this is, like you said earlier, right, this can be very meaningful, and the slightest little insight could shift something. My whole attitude changed once I realized that as my health improves, I'll be fine. But then I also got a lot of help dealing with the difficulties of all the conflict that happened to emerge in the process of my divorce. And I fell in love with it. And my therapist kept telling me, you are an excellent client. You're the best client. He said, I've been teaching, and he was one of the faculty members also at the Gestalt Center. Mm-hmm. He said, I've been teaching and I've been seeing clients for like 30 years or something like that. He said, you are the most ripe client that I've ever had. Like everything that I try to do with you, it works, right?
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Did
it might be because I have a lifetime of practicing meditation, which heightens, and I'm a philosopher by nature and by training. So I have the kind of cognitive framework and reference base for which everything that he would bring to the table made sense to me intuitively. So, and I had faith in the process, maybe because of Ram Dass and because a feedback loop. The more I tried, the more it worked. So the more eager I was to try and grow, and improve my lot. And so I think that was why it worked for me so well. But after maybe 10 sessions, because it was an initial suggestion of 10 sessions. After 10 sessions, he said to me, okay, listen, you came in with a recommendation of 10 sessions to deal with your depression and conflicts dealing with your ex-wife. Well, we weren't divorced yet, but he said, and I think that you've gotten over your difficulties dealing with this, like about 80%. He said, my therapist, when I first went in for counseling, gave me a kind of pass to leave when she said to me, I was about 80% cured. So I want to make the same suggestion to you. He said, we don't like to keep people in Gestalt counseling. We like to fix them and send them on their way. It's hopefully a short-term therapy. He said, but I'm sure it's very supportive for you, and I'll leave it up to you. If you want to come back for another 10 or just a couple of more or whatever, that's fine, but you could stop now, whatever. I did 10 more because I loved it. And during the process, he said to me, you know what, you so love this and you're so good at it that I think that you might actually be you could probably become a really good Gestalt psychotherapist. He recommended that I go. They have a training retreat that they do twice a year, one in the winter and one in the summer. They go off to some retreat center in like the Catskills or the Berkshires. Beautiful little center. And all the students go, all the faculty members go, and they have like intensive client training, like sessions, right? And there'll be lectures and sessions and lectures and sessions. And the second year students, the people who finished the first year, right? This is usually only in the summer. I guess that's when it was. Who finished their first year, in their second year, they have to start seeing clients themselves. So they get to play the role of therapist for the first time at that retreat.
Wow.
So he explained that to me. He said, you're going to get me and the other faculty members, but you will also be able to help the students who've done a year on their maiden voyage, as they call it, and would you like to come? And it's not that expensive, and for non-students, we invite some of our clients every now and then, or someone we know who we think might want to. And it'll be a way for you to figure out if this is really something that you want to do, A. B, you'll get to meet a whole bunch of other Gestalt therapists, and one of them might click with you better than me. And, you know, we want to always help you. We're not covetous.
Right.
It's part of their philosophy. And so I said, yeah, absolutely. And I went and I did it. And now I had a kind of writer's block on my dissertation. I started out with an advisor who was reluctant to be my advisor because he felt like he didn't know enough about my subject, free will. And after he agreed, he went on sabbatical for a year. And so I wrote a lot without any feedback from him. And then I gave him like over 100 pages. Normally you would write 20 pages, like a chapter or something, give it to your advisor. I wrote like almost the whole damn thing. Gave it to him. He didn't like the whole thing at all. Right? So like I wasted a lot of time going back and forth with him. We just didn't click. And I wasn't writing, you know? And because of the truck driving and all that, right? I had been driving a truck anyway, so I couldn't do anything. And I didn't know if I'd ever go back to grad school to finish my PhD, because I figured I'll become a Gestalt psychotherapist. It's better for me. It's good for my health. You know, that's a great career. And it's hard to get a job in philosophy, right? So at that training retreat that weekend, I wrote 30 pages of philosophy on my laptop. 30 pages of my dissertation. And I felt really great. Like it opened up something in me. Just doing all that depth psychology work with people, it was endless, this thing of insight. And like, my mind started working really great. And I wrote a lot. And then I thought, man, I think I can do the philosophy. So when I got back, I went back to the CUNY grad school, which I dropped out of. And I said, okay, I'm ready to try and come back. I went and spoke to the program director. I spoke to my advisor. And he said to me, well, you know what? It's very fortunate for you right now, because when you left, nobody was interested in free will. But now it's all the rage. So there's a lot of stuff being written out there by big shot names. And you could like get some traction by engaging with and critiquing their stuff and making your own position and all that. It's a more fruitful field for you right now. So, great. So I went back to grad school. So to see this thing back, I almost dropped grad school for Gestalt. And then I was doing both. After I got back into the program, I was writing well, seeing my therapist, taking the training, my second year of training or whatever. And then they changed the law when I got hired full time. So that's how I wound up teaching philosophy permanently at Kingsborough. Kingsborough offered me the full-time job, so I took it.
And that was it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, philosophers do other things. Some of them do. Some of them, you know, just go into IT. Some of them go into, you know, I have a friend who from the CUNY Grad Center who got hired in a tenure track job at the University of Colorado. He did 2 or 3 years. They have a very strict publishing requirement. Like every year in your tenure track line, if you don't publish something, you're out. You know, something like, it's not if it's every year, but there's this, by the time you reach, let's say, year 3, you have to have one article or something like a peer-reviewed journal thing. Whatever it was, he didn't have it, and he got out of that, and he went into IT, computer programming, you know. Philosophers, there've been a lot of articles in the Huffington Post and all over the internet about how philosophers make great employees in almost any field because they have this lawyer-like ability to analyze something from multiple perspectives, to reason very carefully. They're extremely articulate. They have high verbal IQ, you know, that sort of thing. So they can do almost anything. It's a great major for almost anybody.
What do you think about those strict rules about people who are in the tenure track having to publish so regularly? Do you think that we miss out on potential great, you know, modern day philosophers, that they kind of drop out or fall off the track because they cannot keep up, or because
really good
keep up with that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and I have mixed feelings about it, so I'm not certain what my answer is, but I'll tell you the pro and con. And it might be like not a good reason. Like those standards were held for me, So I want to make sure that they're held for others.
Right.
And that might be just selfishness. There might be a name for that vice. That's like not a virtue. That character. It's almost like envy or something. Something like Schadenfreude or something like that. It's one of those negative things.
I mean, that happens with like citizenship
Right.
today or immigration.
Right.
We've
Right.
discussed this. I
Right.
feel very similar.
Right, so I'm not sure. Like, I have high standards, too.
Right.
I have very high standards. But I'm also a very compassionate person. And based on what I told you earlier, that I think everybody has the potential for philosophy, if somebody makes it through a PhD program and they're in a tenure track line and they missed the clock, right, do they have the potential or not? Their colleagues who are on the committee that evaluates them should be able to know by the time that they've finished their tenure clock whether or not they have the ability, even if they haven't gotten that article into print yet, because it takes years sometimes, 1 to 2 years, that you're not allowed to submit. It's a norm in my field, in most of academia. I don't know if it's only my own. I think it might be almost all peer-reviewed journals. I know it's true in philosophy. I'm not certain if it applies to the other fields. But when you submit an article to be considered for publication, you're not supposed to submit it to more than one journal at a time. You have to wait to get a rejection letter from Journal A before you could submit it to Journal B. And it could take 6 months to a year before Journal A gives you an answer. Okay? So, think about the tenure clock. They want you to have a publication by a certain time. But technically, there should be people in your department who are on your hiring and promotion committee who could look at that article and read it and tell whether or not it's scholarly enough, even if it's not published. But that's not the norm. It's just not the norm, right? And colleges are bureaucratic institutions, and they all become, rule worshipers. These are the rules. And they're legalistic institutions, too, because there are union contracts and everything, so things have to go by the rules, and lawsuits and grievances are based on violations of the rules. And so if I am lenient toward you, but I'm not lenient toward you, right, then this question about my making the judgments about your scholarship positively, but his negatively, if they're subjective, they're based on me. I am not a peer-reviewing journal. I'm just a colleague of yours, and colleagues have subjective attitudes. You're my friend. I don't like him, that kind of thing. So there are objective reasons why you want to keep with objective standards.
I have a particular question of my own. People in life go through certain mishaps. In a scenario, like let's just say if they got COVID or something specifically had happened, whether they had a lost one or something like that,
Right.
Is there like an appeal process to extend this particular validation, whether or not they have to submit something like this?
Yeah. So look, I'm a grievance counselor on my campus. By grievance, we don't mean when death happens. We mean if somebody feels like they've been mistreated. Because I'm a union delegate, and my union's local chapter on my campus appointed me as the grievance counselor. So if a faculty member has a complaint, they'll come to me. Unless if they're in my department, then I can't represent them. Then they have to go straight to the union, who will represent them. But so I've seen records of previous grievances and whatnot where somebody was not reappointed. So each year that you're on a tenure track, it used to be 5 years when I came up. It changed the year that I went on tenure track to 7 years, but they gave us, those of us who were on the cusp, the choice to stick with the 5-year thing because that was what was in place just when they hired us, or up for the 7-year thing, which is more of a guarantee. You got 2 more years. But then, of course, the longer you take, your salary doesn't go up for that extra 2 years, right? Once you get tenure, you get a little bump in your raise, right? So I picked the 5-year one, and fortunately for me, I did fine. But there was a faculty member who had a fire, and their house burnt down. All their work was destroyed, their computers, everything. It was a huge setback. That person was non-reappointed. So each year that you're on a tenure clock, there are committees in your department. It's called the P&B, Personnel and Budget Committee. They're usually elected, and I'm on the one in mine. But so they decide, they look at all the files of all the people in the department who are on tenure track. What year are you in? You're going from first year to second second year, there's criteria for that. You're going from second year to third year, there's criteria for that. Maybe by the fourth year, you should have one publication, right? Or if not, at least a letter of acceptance from a peer-reviewed journal, and so on. So this person didn't satisfy the criteria, but had a fire. They were non-reappointed. They appealed. There's an appeals committee. The appeals committee considered it. There was evidence of it. It was obviously a real thing. And they were reappointed.
Okay.
So, yeah, there are processes. And then there's grievances, too. Even if somebody fails to win on appeal, then the grievance goes to another step. Usually the college will say no, just as a formal, it's kind of an instinctive, prove your case, and then it'll go to a step two, which is a formal hearing where you present. It's almost like disclosure in the legal world, where you present all your documentation, exhibits, evidence, and everything. And then if the college doesn't accept then, and it rarely does, but sometimes it does, then it goes to step 3, which is the American Arbitration Association. So those are independent people who look at the case and make a decision that's binding, regardless of who wins or loses. There are ways around that too, and the union might choose not to go to arbitration if they think the case is frivolous or that they can't win because it's going to cost them money, and they might just say there's just no way you're going to win, right? You can hire a lawyer on your own, but we can't spend the money on that. But even if they think you're going to lose, if they think it's an important case that's worth fighting, they'll do it just to make it part of the legal record, this kind of thing, whatever. So it's pretty complicated. There are safety mechanisms in place, but these old entrenched institutions, if you've worked in any kind of big bureaucracy ever, they're problematic.
I'm not sure if I'm glad that you said all that, but I guess I am, because I did not know that. I had an issue just from the get-go of what about the possibility of a talented future philosopher not getting to become or do what he has to do because of these guidelines for the tenure track. After listening to all that, it seems like there's just more and more bureaucratic stops for someone to actually get their work out there. It brings me to a different question. Everything that you've said is mainstream academia and how things have been done for so long.
Right.
Can there be modern-day philosophers who have not gone this route? And I know you may have a feeling about this, especially since you've done it. So if someone else, for them to get the recognition or to get their work out there, it should also go through this process. It's almost like paying your dues. But what about someone who didn't go to school, who didn't have the opportunity to go to school? Or even if they did, they didn't, and you can relate to that certainly, at least in the beginning, or at the early stages of your life. Can they still be a philosopher? Can they be considered a philosopher? Or are they, because they don't have the main credentials, do their thoughts not matter, or do they not have value? So, and I think you're in a very
part
interesting...
Of the street philosophy
there you
thing.
go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
Right.
What's your thoughts on
but
that?
what you're talking about is slightly different from the street philosophy thing, because you're wondering whether or not somebody can become a recognized philosopher with a public voice, who's capable of authoring books and articles that appear in peer-reviewed philosophy journals and stuff like that without any credentials at all. And the answer is yes. But, I mean, you'll see every now and then an article in even one of the top philosophy journals that normally on the first page or on the last page, it'll say the author's name and the name of the institution that they're affiliated with, Princeton, Brooklyn College, whatever it is. But sometimes it'll say independent scholar. So if you submit really good philosophical writing to a journal, it's supposed to be anonymous. They have, if it's peer-reviewed, I mean, there are some peer-reviewed journals that are not anonymous, and the editor will just say, we really trust ourselves and our editors, that we don't have to hide your name. But most of them, they ask you to submit your document, whether it's a Word document, a PDF, or whatever, removing all references to yourself. So even citations to your work that will occur in the bibliography should be removed, right? And just keep a placeholder there saying author reference number 1 or something. Then you put them back in later if it's accepted. So, and then they send those out to peer reviewers who are experts in that field to review it. And I'm a reviewer for a number of different journals, and I will get the articles, and I will write my feedback, and I would be reader A or reader B, and like the author will get back the feedback. Some journals are so busy that it's just thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs up with some work, right? Or just up and down, you know? It depends on the journal. Or with accepted with the following revisions made, you know, that kind of thing. So the reviewers don't know what your credentials are. So you could certainly get your articles published in peer-reviewed journals. If you got enough of those published, those would be your credentials if you tried to approach a publisher who's a book publisher. Book publishing is much more challenging. But you would send a book proposal to a book publisher with whatever your credentials are. Even if you're an independent scholar, doesn't matter. But certainly if you're an independent scholar and you want to try to sell get a philosophy book in print, I would encourage you to try to get at least 1 or 2 articles in print in a peer-reviewed journal first, and then that's your evidence of your credentials, that you would submit that with your proposal to a book publisher, along with an outline and maybe a sample chapter or 2. Some of them want a whole manuscript for the whole book before they'll review it. But the good thing about philosophy book publishing, unlike fiction or something like that, you know, screenplays and things like that, for fiction, novels, screenplays, things like that, you need to have an agent, somebody who will introduce you to a publisher. If you don't have an agent, nobody will look at your work. And it's hard to get an agent if you're not published. It's a catch-22. Unless you have really good friends with somebody who has an agent, and then they persuade their friend agent to look at your work, right? Or if you have a really stellar reputation in philosophy as a book publisher in philosophy, that you've written really good books that have become kind of bestsellers in philosophy, then you might be able to, when they see your name. So if you already but if you're already successful, right? Then you could cross over into fiction or whatever. So like big shot philosophers like Sam Harris. Well, actually, Sam Harris is a neuroscientist, not a philosopher, but his bachelor's was in philosophy. So yeah, I mean, if you're an intellectual in any other field and you have any kind of reputation, it's easier for you to try to get a book into print, regardless of where it is.
Gotcha.
And it is, yeah. But in philosophy, it's actually easier because you don't have this agent thing and you don't have to have a reputation already. If the book looks good to the publisher and they think there's a market for it, they'll publish it.
That definitely sounds much better because initially, when you're describing this, I'm like, okay, wow, there are so many bureaucratic
Now that's to get
pauses.
tenure. That's to get
Got
tenure.
it. Yeah, no, this seems like more of a reasonable approach to it, and the anonymity, I definitely, think will encourage more people to send stuff out there. And I'm an idiot. I'm not sending articles anywhere. But for philosophers,
You're far from an idiot, Niaz.
that's kind of insane. But
You got into my top honors class, and you got an A in that class. So that's all I have to say about you being an idiot.
well, thank you.
The top honors class in the college, by the way,
Right. Well,
at the time anyway.
I appreciate you saying that, but I don't think I'll be writing any philosophical articles trying to get them published. But for those of you who are out there are ways to do this. And if you're interested, you don't have to have a philosophical degree. And if you have thoughts in your mind that you think are scholarly and you want to publish them. Speaking of books,
Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
Not just philosophy. People are amateurs who love certain subjects, right? Like there was a fellow named Benjamin Lee Whorf, W-H-O-R-F, who wrote a book called Language, Thought, and Reality. It's a very philosophical book, but I would say that the category of it is philosophy of language and linguistics. I think he was a fireman or something like that, but he was very well read, and he happened to be like kind of amateur linguist slash, or like a kind of anthropological linguist, or linguistic anthropology, or whatever you call it. It was a fascinating book.
What's the book called again?
Language, Thought, and Reality. Benjamin Lee Whorf, W-H-O-R-F. It's a classic in philosophy of language and in linguistics. His theories were really interesting. And I forget one of the other people who, there's a hypothesis named after him and someone else. It's the something or other Whorf hypothesis, but I can't remember the name of the other guy. Almost anybody who takes a grad level course in philosophy of language or linguistics will know about him. It might even be assigned. But I remember reading that book as an undergraduate. My speech teacher, who was, like a PhD in linguistics or something like that at Lehman College, mentioned the book in class, and I just went and read it out of interest. That's the kind of student I was. And I was like, whoa, that book was really phenomenally deeply thought out and interestingly argued. He had weird hypotheses in it. I read it during the semester, and I remember asking the speech teacher if he thought that these hypotheses were credible because they seemed outlandish to me. And he said, no, he's a highly respected man. A lot of people are writing about his ideas. One of them was about Sanskrit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you remember any of the hypotheses?
Sanskrit, he believed that Sanskrit was an exceptionally advanced language grammatically and syntactically and semantically, and that a large part of the language was consciously designed. That was one of his hypotheses. That was so communicative and well organized that he believed that it was significantly designed intentionally and consciously, like Esperanto, that language that was created by linguists back in the 19-something or others, to try to be a universal language. Another one was that the Hopi, the language of the Hopi Indians, had tenses in them, in the language that we don't have, and that explained their different conceptions of cause and effect connected with the rain dance. They had a different conception of time, according to which you're not raining now, you're not dancing the rain dance now to make it rain tomorrow. They had some kind of different metaphysics of time that was structured in their grammar and everything. And I remember thinking that I didn't completely understand it, because I don't think that way, but right. I remember thinking that the argument on its face was plausible and interesting. So I would ask the speech teacher as I was reading these things, do you think that thing he said about the Hopi, the Sanskrit and everything, he said, yeah, no, it makes sense to me. He said, I'm not an expert in those areas, but it's a thought-provoking book.
Yeah, that actually...
Oh, one more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing. That, like, the Inuit, the natives of the Arctic region, not just in the Western Hemisphere, all around the globe, they have something like, in most Inuit languages, they have something like over 50 different words for types of snow. We have just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6, packing snow, or you were talking about snow before the podcast. I won't remind you what that was. But, right. But like they live in a snowy world, so they make these they carve up their universe in conceptual ways. Remember what I said about concepts that have to fit causally with the environment. They capture some cause-effect relationship in the environment. They're causally efficient concepts in their domain. They make houses out of ice and whatnot. There's ice that you could break through easily, and I don't know what the distinctions are. I don't remember. It was too long ago. But then he also noted that the natives in the Amazon, the indigenous peoples, have hundreds of different words for different kinds of parrots, but they don't have the word parrot or the word bird, right? They don't need it.
Wow.
So there's this pragmatism that determines the concepts that a group of, a linguistic community in a certain kind of ecosystem, capture the reality in that system. It was like a lot of fascinating hypotheses in that book. But what's interesting about it is the metaphysics. So language, thought, and reality. Language is just the clothing or the codes. Language is sounds that encode concepts. That's what words are. They're ways to convey concepts. So language and thought. Language is a shadow of thought, right? And then reality is the test. It is my conceptual scheme capturing reality, language, thought, and reality. So that's, yeah, this is an amateur, a fireman or something.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, you love something, you study it, you read about it your whole life, you know, you can write a book about it. Absolutely.
You mentioned the Hopi Indians and their concepts that are kind of now lost because it's not your practice area, so you don't understand it fully. There's been hundreds, thousands of cultures that have disappeared over history. And and I know that you are, you know, pretty well read, and you definitely have shown interest and taken interest in other cultures' philosophy. I know in the past you've discussed Sufism. We discussed various philosophies coming out of Asia. Where does it all come together for you? You know, because you obviously follow one, you know, well, let me ask this. Do you follow one form of philosophy or one philosophy that comes from a certain region, or is it kind of all-encompassing for you? And do you create your own kind of beliefs based on your understanding from all different cultures, philosophies?
Good, really good question. I'll first start with an analogy. When I was a martial arts student, my first karate teacher reminds me of that crazy, militant, aggressive karate teacher in the movie series Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Right? My first karate teacher was
Cobra
like,
Kai.
Yeah, he was like that, Cobra Kai, right? I forget that guy's name, but with the headband, you know.
Who is it, Mikey? Look it up.
He made a comeback too, doing a Netflix show.
Yeah, it's a Netflix show that's really popular now. Who is that guy's name?
While
Yeah,
he looks that up,
Yeah.
I'll keep telling the story. I wouldn't say my first karate teacher was crazy or anything, no, but he was kind of really aggressive and kind of militant, like a drill sergeant, like really like a military guy, you know, very strong guy. And like he would have us on our, you know, doing knuckle push-ups, and if we didn't look strong and fierce enough, he'd get down next to us doing knuckle push-ups, and he'd yell at you like 3 inches away from your face, "The tighter you get, the harder you fight," right? And he'd make you do more, right? Like the weaker you got, the more disciplinary, like laps around the gym or whatever, you know, you name it, jumping jacks. Like he would punish us for our weaknesses with more grueling disciplines. And but after a year, you know, I bought a year's package to like save money on the lessons, right? But like, you know, shortly after, you know, I got a sense of what he was really like. Like when you go and watch a class, they know that you're not somebody who's an uncle of the student, whatever, you're a potential customer. Whenever there's somebody in the audience, the karate teacher thinks potential customer, and they put the class on a certain way.
Right, of course.
Then after you sign up for a year, then you find out, oh, he's like that Cobra Kai guy, right? And I gave him a year without an escape clause. So I did my year, and then I went shopping around. I tried different karate schools, one after another. Each one would ask you as a student to demonstrate something that you learned, and then they would correct you and show you that their way was the right way. And they had all kinds of rationalizations for why their way of doing X is better than your karate teacher was, or whatever, just to try to break you down and make you think that, well, they know something. Wow, I was doing it the wrong way, or whatever. And, you know, make you insecure, and then you think you're going to learn, and you sign up. Similarly, meditation teachers, I've had many of them, and yoga teachers. And it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
With different meditation teachers, different yoga teachers, different martial arts teachers, and then also with different philosophy teachers, right? You know, they all have their biases and their prejudices. And so I learned, like, I don't know where I should say I finally learned this, but I learned early on in my journey of all those different things, meditation, yoga, martial arts, philosophy, like to approach things like a bumblebee and they're all like different flowers, and I'll get a little pollen from this one and a little pollen from that one, and I'll make my own honey. You know, that's my attitude. I don't care where it comes
Very good way of
from.
putting it.
Yeah, if there's something worth learning, I'll take it. You know, otherwise I'll take what I like and leave the rest behind. So like I recently got engaged in a conversation online with somebody who posted something that, like, the Greek Orthodox Church recently proclaimed that yoga was inconsistent with the Greek Orthodox Christianity.
What? Why is that?
Yeah, and that was my initial reaction too, that I had for quite a while. But I mean, here's the thing. If you just take yoga as a kind of exercises, that's like saying Pilates or aerobics is inconsistent with Greek Orthodox Christianity, right?
Right.
And most yoga classes are taught as exercise classes, so they are consistent with anything. But a lot of them are a kind of gateway into Hinduism or Buddhism
Gotcha.
and that kind of thing. And depending on your yoga teacher, right, Om, you're chanting a Sanskrit mantra,
Right.
right? Some of them don't do that. Some of them are completely in English, but some of them have got the incense, and they've got statues of Ganesh and Shiva and all
Right.
these, deities from another religion, and namaste is a wonderful, sweet thing. It just pretty much means hello or goodbye, or technically I bow to that in you, which is the same as that which is within me.
I do find it, sorry to cut you off, I do find it that usually people who are not of that culture, that have adopted that culture, it's a lot of white people,
Right.
to be honest.
Right.
And they're the ones who have all the little deities and Ganesh and the incense up everywhere.
Right.
Usually, people
Right, but-
from that culture are just like, let's just do some yoga and let's
Right.
get down to the mat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have friends from India and whatnot. I've had these conversations with them. So, like, yeah, westernized yoga is mostly just exercise. But then there are those who are kind of Western yogis, or, they're
Right.
spiritual, they're into the New Age thing and all that, aromatherapy and incense, and they're chanting, and they might have a Hindu teacher or something like that. And so, like, it can be a kind of gateway to Hinduism or to
Right.
Buddhism. And that's, I think, what the resistance is. So, like, I mean, yoga technically the word is used as if it's for the third step or the third limb in Ashtanga, which is 8 limbs of yoga. Ashta in Sanskrit is 8. Anga is limbs.
Ashta, yeah.
Yeah, similar in
Yeah.
Bangladesh,
Well,
right?
it all comes from Sanskrit.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
exactly. So the first limb, yama, and second limb, niyama. Ni is a negation. So it's kind of like do's and don'ts. It's like rules and regulations, moral rules like vegetarianism, pacifism, and truth-telling, and scriptural study, and all that. That's the moral stuff. The third limb is the asana. Sana means motion or moving, and means not. So non-moving. The postures are non-moving. You get into a posture and you hold that posture. It's an asana. So there's all these poses. That's the third limb of yoga. The fourth is pranayama, and there's that word yama again, which means control, things that you control. And prana is the life force,
yeah,
the
pran.
breath,
Yeah.
pran. So those are breathing exercises, which is the beginning of meditative practice, but you need to be able to put your body into a meditation posture and keep it there for a long time. That's what those postures were originally designed for, to make the body flexible, healthy, limber, everything, no knots, no blockages for the chi, the life force. They don't call it chi, that's a Chinese thing, right? But it's the same concept. The prana is like the chi. And so you practice it's like qigong in Tai Chi and all that kind of thing. You get your body very, open, so all the channels are open and the prana flows freely. You don't have any knots or blockages. You're healthy, you're flexible, you're strong. You put your body in a meditation posture and you withdraw your mind from your senses. You close your eyes. That's stage, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara in Sanskrit, which is withdrawal.
Yeah.
You're going within.
Okay.
6, 7, 8. Dharana is focusing your mind on one point. That's the beginning of serious meditation practice. You put your mind on one thing, it wanders, you bring it back.
In Bengali, it's dharana.
And then dhyana And in Pali, which is the language that Buddha spoke, it's jhana. And in Chinese, that got turned into chan. And in Japanese, it got turned into zen. The same word, etymologically.
Jhana. Wow.
Yeah, it means meditation.
Right.
So that's when you actually enter a meditative state. So when you're doing one pointedness, you're practicing so that you'll get into a meditation. When you finally get your mind to penetrate to that one thing without moving, you go into a trance-like state. That's called jhana. And then stage 8 is samadhi, which is a kind of transcendent state of oneness. That's yoga. Yoga means literally union. So union of the soul with the all, or with Brahman, right? So the point is, asana is stage 3 in this eight-limbed. Buddhism is eightfold.
Right.
It's the same thing. But this 8-limbed path towards union of the Atman, is it Atta or something? How do you say it? Soul. In something like Atma or Atta?
Atta.
Atta.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Buddhist dialect that the Buddha spoke, which is called Pali, it's Atta also. And that's the jhana instead of dhyana. D-H-Y. Dhya, you know. So, then Chan and then Zen. The yoga means union of the Atman with Brahman. So, like I said, the postures are to prepare you for that journey inward. So the Greek Orthodox Church is technically right that if you're doing yoga right, that's where it's supposed to go.
Right.
And if your teacher is not just some exercise teacher at the gym, it is a gateway. So they're right about that. But even so, there are, advanced Christian theologians and whatnot, like Thomas Merton and whatnot, who've taken meditation practices from Zen and whatnot and adopted it to their Christianity, but they're meditating on God, not on Brahman or on, Buddhahood or something like that.
Right.
So you could take things from, like the way that I said, the pollen, and make your own. You could do that. But you could do it in a way which is consistent or which is inconsistent. If you start adopting Hindu ideas so that you have a different conception of God, where God now becomes the Hindu God, over time, you're no longer really a Greek Orthodox, because the Greek Orthodox don't believe in monism, which is non-dualism. Whereas the yogis, well, not all of them, but some schools of thought, like in Vedanta, which is one of the 6 orthodox philosophies of Hinduism that goes back to the Vedas, the scriptures.
Vedic cultures.
Yeah, there are Advaita or Advaita, which means non-dualistic, right? So they believe that ultimately the soul and Brahman are the same thing. There's no distinction between the individual. God, Guru, and Self are one. That's a famous saying in Vedanta philosophy, right? Whereas the Christians think, no, there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then there's creation. We're separate from God. We don't become God. I have a soul. It's kind of God-like, made in the image and likeness of God, but it's distinct from God and will never become God. Whereas in certain very major forms of Hinduism, that's
God.
Yeah. It's non-dualistic.
Right.
We're all God, which is heresy in the Christian mind. And then the Buddhists, by the way, say, well, no, there's no God anyway. Buddha becomes kind of like a god, or Buddhas become like angels in Buddhism.
Yeah. On that note, let's take a quick break.
Sure.
That was great. Oh, you did pull it up. Okay, so which one was it?
The actor was Ralph Macchio.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's take a look at it. I think that's William Zabaka.
Miyagi.
Dutch.
Oh, one of my Salzburg students said, "You're the Mr. Miyagi of philosophy."
You are the Mr. Miyagi of philosophy.
So we're not recording now, right?
We are recording.
No.
Okay. I think you had. I forget who is it. Randy. No, that's not Randy. William Zabaka was the guy. I forget who was the
head leader.
Angry sensei
was Martin Cove, who passed away.
Martin Cove?
Still a picture of him up there?
That's him, yes.
Oh, yeah, there he is. That's
the guy.
Yeah.
That's the guy. Wait, I can definitely I know the angry photos that you would. That's him, right?
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
That guy.
And he did a commercial, so I don't know when he shot that commercial, but for him to pass away, it must have been recent,
right?
Yeah, it must have been recent.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Let's see.
Wax on, wax off.
He didn't pass away. He's
What?
from Brooklyn, New York. He didn't pass away. Doesn't?
Oh, well, under if you go to that Google search tab,
Uh-huh.
right there on Wikipedia, unless somebody changed it.
Markov. Because IMDb's pretty accurate. They would have updated right away. No, he's active.
Okay.
He's active. Not dead.
Oh, to present.
Yeah, look at this guy. Look at this guy. Still angry at this age. All right, let's take a break. We'll be right back.